My name is Elena Whitaker. I was 36 years old the week my grandfather's entire world was signed away to the man who never once understood it. Hank Whitaker built Whitaker's Marina from nothing but salt air, stubbornness, and a dream that smelled like diesel and pine. He turned a muddy patch of Oregon coastline into the only place where fishermen, weekend sailors, and old-timers felt truly at home. He died on a rainy Tuesday in late October. By Friday my father stood on the weathered dock in front of half the county and told me I'd inherit nothing but echoes. He said it with a smile. "You won't get a single rope on this dock, Elena," he announced, loud enough for the wind to carry his words across the water. "Ryan's the one who'll carry the family name forward." My younger brother shifted uncomfortably beside him, staring at his boots while the rest of the family nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply stood there in the cold mist, feeling the brass key in my coat pocket, the one Grandpa Hank had given me when I was 12, grow heavier against my ribs. That night, after everyone had gone home and the marina lights reflected like broken stars on the black water, I sat alone in the old office. The smell of salt, varnish, and faded ledgers still clung to the walls. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. Because around 11:30, long after the last truck had left the gravel lot, someone knocked on my apartment door above the boathouse. 3 soft, deliberate knocks. When I opened it, a woman I'd never seen stood under the flickering porch light. She was in her late 70s, wearing a sensible wool coat, holding a plain manila envelope. "Are you Elena Whitaker?" she asked quietly. "The girl who kept Hank's real books." The fact that she knew about the books made my breath catch. I nodded. She studied my face for a long moment, then held out the envelope. "It's time," she said, her voice steady like someone who had delivered hard truths before, "to stop being invisible. If you've ever been the one in your family who quietly kept everything running while everyone else got the credit, stay with me. Because this is the story of how a quiet daughter who spent her life in the shadows finally stepped into the light. Not with screams or tears, but with the one thing my grandfather taught me matters most, the truth that numbers never lie. People do." Welcome to the calm before the storm. If this already feels familiar, drop a open book in the comments. You're not alone here. That knock at my door changed everything. But before I tell you what was inside that envelope, I need to take you back to the beginning. Because none of this makes sense unless you understand what Whitaker's Marina really was, and what it meant to me. I grew up on that dock. Not in the pretty way people imagine when they think of coastal towns. I mean salt-stained sneakers, rope burns on my palms, and the constant cry of seagulls fighting over scraps of bait. Grandpa Hank bought the land when my father was just a boy. It was nothing but marsh and broken crab traps back then. By the time I came along, it had become the heartbeat of our small Oregon town, a place where commercial fishermen docked at dawn, weekend boaters paid for slips, and old salt sat on the benches swapping stories that grew taller with every retelling. I was 7 the first time Grandpa Hank let me sit on the tall stool behind the counter in the office. The air always smelled of marine varnish, diesel, and the faint sweetness of the old blue ledger that lived in the top drawer. That ledger, with its cracked navy leather cover and pages soft from years of handling, became my favorite thing in the world. "Numbers don't lie, Elena," he'd say in that gravelly voice of his, sliding the book across to me. "People do. Especially when money's on the table." He'd watch me carefully enter the day's fuel sales, slip rentals, and repair invoices in my neatest handwriting. I was only 9 when he started trusting me with the real books. Not the pretty ones he showed the tax man. The real ones. My father, Victor, never understood that. He was the oldest son, the one who was supposed to inherit everything. But he hated the smell of the marina. Hated the early mornings, the unpredictable tides, the way Grandpa Hank could read the water like other men read the newspaper. Victor wanted shiny offices and big deals in the city. He only came back when he needed money or when it looked good for appearances. Meanwhile, I was there every summer, every weekend, every holiday. I learned how to tie a perfect cleat hitch before I could ride a bike properly. I knew which customers paid late and which ones were good for it just by the way they walked down the dock. Grandpa Hank would rest his weathered hand on my shoulder and say, "You see more than most, kiddo. That's your gift." There was one other thing he gave me that I still carry everywhere. A small silver key on a worn leather fob. It opened the side gate to the private docks where he kept his own boat, an old wooden trawler named Second Chance. "This key isn't for everyone," he told me the day he handed it over. "It's for the ones who understand what this place really costs." I wore that key around my neck for years like a secret medal. My brother Ryan came along 4 years after me. He was the charming one, quick smile, easy laugh, always the favorite at family gatherings. Dad poured everything into him, trying to mold him into the son he wished he'd been. But Ryan was more interested in fast boats and easier money than in the slow, honest work of running a marina. I never minded. At least I told myself I didn't. Being useful felt safer than being wanted. That was the quiet bargain I made with myself early on. If you've ever been the child who earned their place by being reliable instead of being loved out loud, I see you. Type a book emoji if that was you too. Grandpa Hank and I kept our own rhythm. Early mornings checking the fuel logs. Late afternoons balancing the books while the sun dipped behind the mountains and painted the water gold. He never said, "I love you," the way other grandfathers did. Instead, he taught me how to protect what mattered. How to watch the numbers so no one could steal what we built. Those childhood years on the marina shaped me more than any classroom ever could. They taught me patience. They taught me that the quietest person in the room often holds the real power, because they're the one keeping the records. But power like that only stays hidden for so long. By the time Grandpa Hank got sick that final spring, I had already been working as a paralegal specializing in probate and estate law for over a decade. Funny how life prepares you, isn't it? I'd spent my days helping strangers fight over what their loved ones left behind, never imagining I'd one day have to use those same skills against my own blood. The marina kept running like it always had because I made sure it did. Even when Grandpa Hank was too weak to walk the docks, the ledger stayed current. The bills got paid. The customers never knew how fragile everything was becoming. Then he was gone. And my father moved faster than the tide. The years slipped by like the tide, and somewhere along the way I stopped being just Grandpa Hank's helper, and became the person who actually kept Whitaker's marina afloat. It didn't happen with a big announcement. It happened in the quiet moments, staying late to reconcile the accounts when everyone else had gone home, catching errors in fuel deliveries before they cost us thousands, quietly covering for my father's occasional business trips that left the books in chaos. By the time I was 24, I was running the entire back office while still working my paralegal job in the county seat 30 miles away. I'd drive back every evening, change into old jeans, and sit under the humming fluorescent light with that navy blue ledger open in front of me. Its pages had become like old friends, familiar creases, coffee stains from Grandpa Hank's mug, and my own careful handwriting filling line after line. My father hated it. Victor Whitaker never said it outright, but I felt it in the way he looked at me whenever he came down to the marina. There was always this edge in his voice. "Still playing secretary, Elena?" he'd ask, even after I'd single-handedly negotiated better insurance rates that saved us nearly $15,000 one year. He wanted the marina to succeed, of course he did, but he didn't want me to be the reason it succeeded. In his mind, the Whitaker legacy belonged to the men, especially to Ryan. Ryan was 20 when he started showing up more often. Dad poured money and attention into him like he was trying to fast-track him into the role of future owner. New truck, fancy fishing gear, weekend trips to learn the business. But Ryan's idea of learning usually involved taking the nicest boat out with his friends and coming back with empty coolers and excuses. I'd quietly fix the fuel logs, adjust the maintenance schedules, and make sure the customers didn't notice. I told myself it was fine. I was useful. Useful was safe. Useful meant I belonged, even if I was never the one standing in the spotlight on the dock shaking hands and telling stories. There were nights, though, when the weight of it pressed on my chest. I'd sit alone in the office after closing, the silver key cool against my skin, and wonder why being the one who kept everything together somehow made me invisible. Grandpa Hank saw me, though. He'd shuffle in, lean against the doorframe, and just watch me work. "You're the spine of this place, kiddo," he said once, his voice rough from years of salt air. "Don't ever let anyone convince you different." Those words kept me going through the long seasons when my father would disappear for weeks, and Ryan would party away the profits I worked so hard to protect. Life moved on. I built a quiet career helping other families navigate death and inheritance. Irony has a cruel sense of humor, doesn't it? I spent my days watching strangers fight over estates, advising them on fiduciary duties and probate law, all while my own family slowly drifted toward the same storm. Then Grandpa Hank's health started failing. That last spring, I moved into the small apartment above the boathouse so I could be closer. I handled the medical bills, coordinated caregivers, and kept the marina running like a well-oiled engine. My father showed up for photo opportunities, smiling beside Hank's hospital bed for social media posts about family first. Ryan visited when it was convenient. I was the one holding Hank's hand when the pain got bad, the one who read him the tide charts because it comforted him. The night before he passed, Grandpa Hank was lucid for a brief window. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength and whispered, "The blue ledger and the key, they're yours. Always were." I thought he was just being sentimental. I didn't realize he was trying to tell me something far more important. If you've ever been the one who quietly carried the weight while others got the glory, you know how lonely that road can feel. But here's what I've learned: the invisible ones are often the only ones who truly see the full picture. And sometimes that sight becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. When Grandpa Hank died, I thought the hardest part was over. The grief, the empty dock, the silence where his laugh used to be. I was wrong. The real storm was just beginning. The final spring came too fast. Grandpa Hank had always been larger than the sea itself in my eyes. Broad shoulders, sun-leathered skin, and a laugh that could cut through fog. But cancer doesn't care about legends. Took him piece by piece. I moved into the little apartment over the boathouse full-time, balancing my paralegal work during the day and sitting with him through the long nights. The navy blue ledger stayed open on the desk beside his bed, a quiet reminder of the life we had built together. In those quiet hours he would drift in and out of clarity. Sometimes he'd talk about the old days, storms they weathered, deals made on handshakes, the way the marina had saved our family more than once. Other times he'd just hold my hand and listen to the water lapping against the pilings below. One night, when the pain meds had loosened his tongue, he looked at me with those sharp eyes that hadn't faded completely and said, "I put things in order, Elena. 6 years back. Harold helped me. You remember him?" I nodded. I had driven him to the old lawyer's office in town. I sat in the waiting room while he signed papers behind closed doors. He came out looking lighter, like he'd finally set down something heavy. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. He passed peacefully on a Tuesday afternoon while rain tapped against the windows. The marina felt different immediately, quieter, heavier. I handled the arrangements the way I always handled things, calmly, thoroughly, making sure every fisherman who wanted to pay respects could tie up at the dock without cost. My father arrived the next day with Ryan in tow, playing the role of grieving son perfectly for the visitors. But I noticed how his eyes kept scanning the office, lingering on the desk drawers. 3 days after the funeral, the family gathered on the main dock at sunset. The air smelled of salt and chrysanthemums from the wreaths. My father stood at the end of the pier where Grandpa Hank used to stand, addressing the small crowd of relatives, longtime customers and neighbors. He didn't waste time. "There's no will," he announced, his voice carrying over the water. "Dad never got around to making one. Under the law, as his only living son, the marina and all the property come to me as administrator." He paused, letting the word settle. Then his gaze found me standing near the back. "Elena, you've been a big help over the years, but this is a business. Ryan's the one who'll carry the Whitaker name forward. You won't be getting a single slip or a single share. That's just how it has to be." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Ryan stared at the wooden planks, cheeks flushed. No one challenged him. Not in that moment. Not with the grief still fresh and the wind picking up. I felt the words hit like a cold wave, but I didn't flinch. I simply nodded once, the silver key pressing against my chest under my sweater. Inside something shifted. The paralegal part of me, the one who had seen this exact play dozens of times in other families, woke up fully. I knew the law. I knew how administrators were supposed to act. And I knew my grandfather well enough to know he would never have left things to chance. That night, back in the apartment, I sat at the small kitchen table with a fresh legal pad. I started writing everything down: dates, conversations, the look on my father's face when he said there was no will. The same way Grandpa Hank taught me to keep the real books. Not the ones for show. The ones that told the truth. If you've ever sat in a room full of family and realized you were being erased while everyone else smiled and nodded, you know how surreal that moment feels. It's not loud rage. It's a quiet, bone-deep clarity. The kind that says, "Okay, now I see you." My father thought he was closing a chapter. He had no idea I was just opening the ledger. The days after the dock announcement blurred together in a haze of condolences and casseroles. My father moved like a man who had been waiting years for this moment. Within a week, he had changed the locks on the main office, transferred the marina's main bank accounts into his temporary control, and started talking about modernizing the business, code for selling off pieces he didn't like. I watched it all from a distance, saying very little. That's what they expected from me. Quiet, reliable Elena who would simply accept her place. But every night I sat at my kitchen table with the old navy blue ledger I had taken home weeks earlier for safekeeping. I began rebuilding the full financial picture from memory, and the copies I'd kept over the years. The numbers told a different story than the one my father was spinning. Then came the second gathering, this time on the wide front porch of Grandpa Hank's old house overlooking the marina. The same people from the dock were there, plus a few more cousins and neighbors. My father stood on the top step like he owned the view. He wore a new jacket, the kind that screamed "in charge." He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "As administrator of Dad's estate," he said, his voice smooth and confident, "I'll be making the decisions going forward. The marina needs strong leadership. Ryan will be stepping up as the next in line. Elena," he looked straight at me, a small smile playing on his lips. You've done good work keeping the books all these years. But this is a family business, not a hobby. You won't be getting any ownership stake. That's just the way the law works when there's no will. A murmur went through the small crowd. Someone chuckled nervously. Ryan looked pale, shifting his weight from foot to foot but saying nothing. My father's eyes stayed on me, waiting for the outburst, the tears, the scene that would let everyone label me as emotional or ungrateful. I didn't give it to him. I simply met his gaze and nodded once, the same calm way I used to nod when Grandpa Hank gave me a difficult task. Then I turned, walked up the porch steps past him, and went inside the house to collect a few of my things. The screen door clicked shut behind me with a soft finality that felt louder than any shout. That night, back in my apartment above the boathouse, the reality settled in. My father wasn't just taking control, he was erasing me. He believed that because I had always been the quiet one, the useful one, I would simply fade away without a fight. He had no idea that my years as a probate paralegal had taught me exactly how this game was played and how to win it. I poured myself a cup of coffee and opened my legal pad again. At the top of a fresh page I wrote a single line in the neat handwriting Grandpa Hank had taught me. Questions. Underneath it, if there really was no will, why is Dad moving so fast? The answers would come, but not by shouting. They would come by watching, waiting, and building my case in silence, the same way I had kept the Marina's real books for 24 years. If you've ever been told to your face that your years of quiet loyalty meant nothing, you know the fire that starts burning low and steady in your chest. It's not the loud kind of anger that burns out fast. It's the kind that keeps you sharp. My father had just made his first real mistake. He underestimated the woman who knew where every dollar had gone for more than 2 decades. And I was finally ready to remind him. The silence after the porch declaration didn't last long. My father moved with the precision of someone who had planned this for years. Within 10 days of Grandpa Hank's passing, he filed paperwork to become the official administrator of the estate. No will, he claimed. Just intestate succession, everything flowing straight to him as the only surviving son. On paper it looked clean, but I knew better. I started noticing the discrepancies almost immediately. Small things at first. A large fuel delivery that showed up in the logs at a suspiciously low price. Then 2 prime dock slips that suddenly had new long-term lease agreements with companies I'd never heard of. But the real blow came when I drove past the county recorder's office on my lunch break and decided, on impulse, to pull the recent property records for the Marina land. That's when I found it. 2 critical parcels, the main boatyard and the deepwater access point that made the whole operation profitable, had been quietly transferred just weeks before Grandpa Hank died. The deeds listed a new LLC called Coastal Horizon Holdings. The sale price less than 30% of what those parcels were actually worth. And the signature on the transfer documents, it was supposed to be Grandpa Hank's, but I knew every loop and pressure mark of his handwriting. This one was close. Too close. A careful forgery. I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at the printed copies until the ink blurred. The silver key around my neck felt like it was burning. Grandpa Hank would never have sold those pieces, especially not at that price, and certainly not to some faceless LLC while he was bedridden and on heavy medication. That night I spread everything across my kitchen table. I pulled out the old navy blue ledger I had safeguarded and began building what I started calling my shadow ledger. Line by line, month by month, I reconstructed 24 years of real numbers from memory, old receipts, bank statements I'd kept, and the meticulous records I'd maintained. Fuel sales, slip rentals, repair income, winter storage fees, everything. The picture that emerged was damning. The Marina wasn't struggling like my father had claimed on the porch. It was stable, profitable, even with steady growth in the last 5 years thanks to the systems I had quietly implemented. But according to the documents my father was filing, the estate was barely solvent, just enough to cover debts and administrative costs. If you've ever watched someone try to rewrite your family's history, while the truth is still warm, you know how surreal it feels. It's not just about money. It's about being erased from a story you helped write with your own hands. I worked through the night, cross-referencing every entry. By dawn, I had a clear trail. Coastal Horizon Holdings was registered to a shell company with connections that looped straight back to my father. Victor Whitaker wasn't just taking control. He was siphoning the heart of the Marina into his own pocket before the estate was even properly opened. He thought I wouldn't notice. After all, I was just the quiet bookkeeper, the invisible daughter who had spent her life making sure the numbers balanced for everyone else. But those same numbers were now balancing against him. I leaned back in my chair as the first light touched the water outside my window. The anger wasn't loud. It was cold and precise, the same feeling I get when I catch a fraudulent claim in a probate case at work. This wasn't grief anymore. This was a case. And I was no longer just the grieving granddaughter. I was the woman who kept the real books. And the books were starting to speak. The discovery of the forged transfers lit a quiet fire in me, but I didn't rush to confront anyone. That's not how you win against someone like my father. Instead, I kept doing what I'd always done, observing, documenting, and staying calm while the pressure started to build. My father called me 3 days later. His voice was warm, almost affectionate, the way it got when he wanted something. "Elena, kiddo," he said, using a nickname he hadn't touched in 15 years. "This whole situation with the marina is tearing the family apart. Your grandpa wouldn't want that. Ryan's got a baby on the way, you know. He needs stability. Why don't you come by the house and sign a simple family settlement agreement? It'll keep things peaceful. You'll still have a place here, maybe managing the books part-time." I listened to him talk, hearing the script he'd prepared. Behind him, I could hear my stepmother prompting in the background. Then Ryan got on the phone, sounding exhausted and guilty. "Sis, Dad's just trying to do right by everyone. I don't want to fight. The baby, we're already behind on bills. You've always been the strong one. Help us out here." It was masterful, really. Never outright, "Give me the money." Always, "You're hurting the family. You're being selfish. Think of your nephew." The kind of emotional blackmail that works especially well on someone who spent her life being useful. I didn't refuse. I told him I needed time to read the agreement carefully. "You know how I am with paperwork," I said lightly. He liked that. It fed his image of me as the cautious, harmless daughter. I hung up almost friendly, then placed the unsigned document next to the forged deed copies on my table. 2 versions of the same lie. The gaslighting came next. At a small family dinner he insisted on hosting at the Marina House, my father casually mentioned how Grandpa Hank had been confused toward the end. "Poor Dad started forgetting things," he said, looking around the table. "He even talked about changing things, but we all know he never got around to it." His eyes flicked to me. "Elena remembers how forgetful he got, right?" I met his gaze steadily. "I remember everything, Dad." The table went quiet for a beat. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Ryan pulled me aside later on the porch. He looked worn thin, new fatherhood, debt, and the weight of Dad's expectations all pressing down on him. "He says you're making this harder than it has to be," Ryan whispered. "That you've always been jealous of me getting more attention. Is that true, El?" His voice cracked just enough to sound genuine. For a moment I saw the little brother I used to protect from bullies, now being used as a shield. That was the hardest part, watching my own brother become a tool in my father's plan. Victor wasn't cartoon evil. He was smart. He knew exactly which cracks to press: my loyalty to family, my love for Ryan, my long habit of putting everyone else's needs first. If you've ever had family turn your own kindness into a weapon against you, you know how deeply that cuts. It makes you question your own memories, your own worth. But here's what I reminded myself that night. Sitting with the silver key in my hand, being kind doesn't mean being blind. And being quiet doesn't mean being weak. I kept my responses measured. I asked polite questions. I requested documents. Every time my father or his attorney stonewalled, it only confirmed what the numbers were already telling me. They were hiding something big. The pressure kept mounting. Late-night texts from relatives asking why I was causing drama during grief. Subtle threats about cutting me out of future family events. My father even hinted that if I pushed too hard, he might have to restructure the marina in ways that affected the longtime employees I cared about. But every night I returned to my shadow ledger. The discrepancies grew clearer. Inflated administrative fees, payments to his own shell companies, insurance policies quietly allowed to lapse on key assets. He was looting the marina while pretending to manage it. He thought the emotional weight would break me. He thought my silence meant surrender. He was wrong. The real turning point came on a cold, misty night when I least expected it, the night the stranger returned to my door. The pressure from my father had been building for weeks when that second knock came. It was past 11 on a raw November night. Rain lashed against the windows of my little apartment above the boathouse. I was sitting at the table surrounded by papers when 3 soft but deliberate knocks sounded on the door. My heart jumped. I grabbed the silver key like a talisman and went to answer. A woman stood under the dim porch light, rain glistening on her wool coat. She looked to be in her late 70s, posture straight like someone who had spent decades behind a desk handling important matters. Her eyes were kind but carried the weight of someone who had seen too many last wishes ignored. "Are you Elena Whitaker?" she asked, voice low against the rain. "The granddaughter who kept Hank's real books for all those years." The words hit me like a wave. No one outside the family knew that detail. I nodded slowly. She introduced herself as Margaret Hale. For 32 years she had been the legal secretary and notary for Harold Klein, The old attorney Grandpa Hank had trusted. I saw the obituary, she said. Then I saw the probate notice saying your grandfather died without a will. I couldn't sleep for 3 nights knowing that wasn't true. She reached into her coat and pulled out a plain manila envelope, softened by handling. I kept a conformed copy. And my notary journal. It's time someone stood up for what Hank actually wanted. I invited her inside, hands trembling as I made coffee. We sat at the same table where I had been building my shadow ledger. From the envelope slid 3 things that changed everything. The first was a clear photocopy of Grandpa Hank's last will and testament, dated 6 years earlier. Every page initialed in his unmistakable hand. The second was a photocopied page from Margaret's official notary journal, the exact entry recording the signing with her stamp and seal. The third was a small index card with the name and contact of the second witness, an old dockhand named Samuel Reyes who had retired up the coast. I read the will twice, tears blurring the words. Grandpa Hank had not left everything to my father. He had divided the marina and the prime waterfront property jointly between Ryan and me, with a fair cash portion set aside for my father. Not nothing for his son, but not the kingdom either. The man who had taught me the value of honest work had seen me. He had chosen to protect the quiet one who actually understood the marina. Margaret sipped her coffee and watched me carefully. A copy isn't the original, honey. The law will presume he destroyed it unless you can prove otherwise. But you're the bookkeeper. You know how to prove things. Before she left, she squeezed my hand. Hank was proud of you. He told us that day you were waiting in the car. Said you kept the real books when no one else could. I sat there long after her taillights disappeared into the rain, the silver key and the navy blue ledger on the table beside the will copy. For the first time since the porch, I felt something solid beneath my feet. Not hope yet, but proof. If you've ever had a stranger show up at your lowest moment carrying the truth your own family tried to bury, you understand what that envelope meant. It wasn't just legal papers. It was validation that I wasn't crazy, that my years of quiet loyalty hadn't been invisible to the one person who mattered most. My father had moved fast, thinking he could rewrite history while everyone grieved. But now I had the missing piece. The will existed, and I was going to make sure it spoke. The real work began that night. I knew I couldn't just wave a copy in court. I had to rebuild the entire case, locate the second witness, prove access to the original document, expose the forged transfers, and force a full accounting. It would be slow, methodical, and lonely. But for the first time, I wasn't doing it for everyone else. I was doing it for Grandpa Hank. And for the girl who had spent her life keeping the books no one else wanted to read. The envelope from Margaret became my anchor in the storm. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat with the conformed copy of the will spread across the table next to the navy blue ledger and the silver key. Grandpa Hank's signature stared back at me, strong, certain, nothing like the shaky forgery on those land transfers. For the first time since his death, I felt him standing beside me. The next morning I called in sick to work and began the unglamorous work of rebuilding a case that could survive probate court. I knew the law well enough to understand the biggest hurdle, the presumption of revocation. If a will was last known to be in the testator's possession and can't be found, the court assumes he destroyed it himself. My father would hide behind that rule like a shield. I had to prove someone else took it. I started with the second witness, Samuel Reyes. The index card gave me an old phone number that was disconnected. But small coastal towns have long memories. After 2 days of calls to retired dockworkers and fishing captains, I found him living in a modest trailer 2 hours up the coast in Washington. He was 83, sharp as tidewater, and wary when I first explained who I was. I drove up that Friday with the will copy and Margaret's notary page. Samuel met me on his porch overlooking the strait. When I showed him the documents, his eyes softened. Hank bought us all coffee and donuts that day, he remembered with a quiet laugh. Said he was finally putting his house in order. Told me his granddaughter was the only one who really understood the marina. Called you the keeper of the real books. He agreed without hesitation to give a sworn statement. For Hank, he said simply, I'll come when the court calls. One witness secured. One more piece of the foundation in place. But I still needed the link that put the original will in my father's hands. That's when I remembered the old floor safe in Grandpa Hank's office. The heavy iron one bolted into the floor behind his desk. I'd seen him open it 100 times. He kept his most important papers there, the original deeds, his Navy discharge, and yes, I was certain the original will. I started calling every locksmith in the county. On the 4th try, a gruff man named Terry picked up. When I described the job, an old floor safe at the Whitaker property, he remembered it immediately. Yeah, about 10 days after the old man passed. The son Victor called me out. Said he lost the combination in all the grief. I drilled it and replaced the lock. He still had the work order, dated, signed by my father, 11 days after the funeral. I sat in my car outside the locksmith shop, the printout shaking slightly in my hands. My father hadn't lost the will. He had opened the safe, taken what he didn't like, and changed the lock so no one could ever prove what was once inside. That was the missing link. Access, motive, opportunity, all in black and white on a simple work order. If you've ever felt the moment when scattered puzzle pieces suddenly lock together into a clear picture, that's what it felt like. Not triumph yet, but the deep satisfaction of watching the numbers finally balance. I hired a sharp probate attorney named Rebecca Torres the next day. She reviewed everything, the will copy, the notary journal, Samuel's statement, the forged deeds, the shadow ledger, and now the locksmith record. She looked at me across her desk and said, "This is strong, Elena. Not guaranteed, but strong. We'll file a petition to admit the lost will and a motion to compel a full accounting. Your father won't be able to hide behind delays anymore." We filed both documents the following Monday. For the first time, my father was going to have to answer in front of a judge, not just on his porch. The quiet bookkeeper had stopped taking notes in the dark. She was preparing to read them in the light. The court filings went in like a quiet declaration of war. Rebecca Torres, my attorney, handled the heavy lifting, but I sat beside her as we submitted the petition to admit Grandpa Hank's lost will, and the motion to compel a complete accounting from my father as administrator. The courtroom clerk barely looked up, but I felt the weight of every page. The conformed copy, Margaret's notary journal, Samuel's sworn statement, the locksmith work order, and my meticulously prepared shadow ledger with highlighted discrepancies. It was all there. Word travels fast in a small coastal town. By the end of the week, my father knew. He didn't call me directly. Instead, he summoned another family meeting at the Marina house. This time the atmosphere was different, thicker, more charged. Cousins, uncles, and a few longtime customers filled the living room. My father stood near the fireplace, his face a careful mask of wounded patience. He didn't wait for me to speak first. "Elena has decided to drag your grandfather's name through the mud," he announced, voice heavy with disappointment. "She's claiming there's some secret will and that I've been stealing from the estate. After everything I've done for this family." He shook his head slowly. "She's always been jealous of Ryan, always thought the Marina should revolve around her little ledgers." Several heads turned toward me. Ryan stood in the corner looking torn, his eyes darting between us. My stepmother watched with tight lips. The room felt like the porch all over again. Except this time I wasn't just absorbing the blow. I was ready. I stood up calmly, my voice steady like I was reading from one of my probate files. "I'm not dragging Grandpa through anything. I'm asking the court to honor what he actually wrote. I have witnesses. I have records. All I want is transparency." My father's laugh was short and sharp. "Records? You mean the ones you've been obsessing over since you were a kid? This is exactly why the Marina needs real leadership, not someone who plays with pencils." The words stung, but I didn't rise to them. I simply looked at Ryan. "You signed papers without reading them, didn't you, supporting Dad as administrator, waiving your rights to object?" His face paled. He didn't deny it. That night, after the gathering broke up in awkward silence, Ryan showed up at my apartment door alone. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes. "I didn't know it was this bad, El," he said quietly, stepping inside when I let him. "Dad said you were overreacting, that the will stuff was made up. But after today, I don't know what to believe anymore." I didn't push him. I simply showed him copies of the forged deeds and the locksmith receipt. I watched my little brother read the numbers that told the truth about what our father had done. His hand shook slightly. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "If this is real, what does that make me?" I let the question hang for a moment. "It makes you someone who was used," I said gently. "The same as me. The difference is what you choose now that you know." He didn't promise anything that night, but he left the papers with him. A small crack had formed in my father's shield. If you've ever had to watch a family member slowly wake up to the truth about someone they trusted, you know how painful and hopeful that moment is. It's not instant loyalty. It's the beginning of something real. The court date was set for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, my father's attorney tried every delay tactic in the book. But Judge Ramirez, known for cutting through family nonsense, granted our motion for a full accounting within 21 days. For the first time, my father would have to put real numbers on paper under oath. I spent those weeks preparing not just the legal side but myself. I practiced staying calm in front of the mirror. I replayed Grandpa Hank's voice in my head. "Numbers don't lie, Elena. People do." I held the silver key and the navy blue ledger like talismans. My father thought he was still in control. He had no idea the quiet bookkeeper had turned the page. The 6 weeks between filing and the hearing felt like the calm before a storm rolling in off the Pacific. I spent every spare hour preparing. Not just the documents but myself. Rebecca Torres and I met 3 times a week in her office overlooking the harbor. She would drill me on possible cross-examinations, walking me through every weak point my father's attorney might attack. "Stay calm," she kept reminding me. "Your strength is in the quiet delivery. Let the papers do the shouting." I practiced in front of the mirror in my apartment, the navy blue ledger open on the table beside me. I spoke the facts out loud the way Grandpa Hank taught me to read the tide charts, clear, steady, without unnecessary emotion. I rehearsed how I would present the locksmith work order, the forged deed, the shadow ledger entries. I imagined my father's face when the judge saw the evidence, and I practiced not reacting when I pictured him lashing out. One evening Ryan came over again. He had been quieter since our last talk, processing everything in his own time. We sat on the small deck overlooking the dark water, the silver key cool in my hand. "I told Dad I'm not supporting him anymore," he said finally. "Not after seeing those papers." He got angry, said I was choosing you over family. His voice cracked. "But I can't unsee it, Elle. I can't pretend anymore." I didn't hug him or offer easy comfort. I simply nodded. Then stand in the truth when the time comes. That's all Grandpa would have asked. Those final days, I walked the marina at dawn like I used to with Grandpa Hank. The brass bell on the office door still rang the same way. The docks creaked under my feet. I touched every cleat and piling, reminding myself what this fight was really for. Not revenge but restoration. For the place that raised me. For the man who trusted the quiet granddaughter with his life's work. The night before the hearing, Margaret stopped by with a small tin of homemade cookies and quiet wisdom. "Don't try to win the room," she said. "Just tell the truth plainly. Hank trusted you with the books for a reason." I slept better than I expected. When I woke, I put on a simple navy blouse, the color of the old ledger, and slipped the silver key around my neck under my collar. I picked up the ledger and the thin folder containing the heart of my case. In the car, I whispered to myself, "Numbers don't lie. People do." If you've ever prepared for the hardest conversation of your life, knowing your own family would be on the other side, you understand the strange mix of fear and peace that settles in. It's not bravado. It's clarity. The kind that comes after years of being invisible and finally deciding your voice matters. The courthouse smelled of old wood and floor polish. My father was already there in the hallway, dressed sharply, his attorney beside him. When he saw me, his expression hardened. "Still chasing shadows, Elena," he said loud enough for relatives to hear. "You won't get a single slip on that dock." I met his eyes calmly and said nothing. I didn't need to. The bell was about to ring on the truth. We walked into the courtroom together. The same family that had watched me get erased on the porch, now about to watch the books get opened in public. This was no longer just a legal hearing. It was the moment the quiet bookkeeper finally read the ledger out loud. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread through the coastal town like morning fog. Fishermen in clean shirts, longtime customers, distant cousins, and old dockhands filled the wooden benches. The air felt thick with salt air and anticipation. I sat at the petitioner's table beside Rebecca, the navy blue ledger resting under my hands like a shield. My father sat across the aisle, jaw tight, refusing to look at me. Judge Ramirez called the session to order. Rebecca stood first and presented our case with quiet precision. Margaret testified beautifully, her notary journal open on the stand, her voice steady as she read the exact entry from 6 years earlier. Samuel Reyes followed, walking slowly but speaking clearly. He looked straight at the judge and said, "Hank told me that day his granddaughter Elena was the one who kept the real books. He was proud, real proud." Then it was my turn. I took the stand with my thin folder and the ledger. I didn't raise my voice once. I let the documents speak. First, the locksmith work order projected on the screen for everyone to see. Dated 11 days after Grandpa Hank's funeral. Signed by Victor Whitaker. I explained in a calm, even tone how my grandfather kept his most important papers in that safe, and how only my father had access after his death. Next came the forged deeds to Coastal Horizon Holdings. Then page after page of the accounting my father had finally been forced to produce. Inflated fees, payments to his own companies, lapsed insurance on the boats and docks. I read each entry plainly without drama, the same way I used to read the daily fuel logs to Grandpa Hank. The gallery was completely silent. When I finished, I looked directly at my father for the first time and said softly, "You taught me the books don't lie, Dad. People do. This is the page you forgot to change." For one heartbeat, the room held its breath. Then my father broke. He shot up from his chair, face red. "She's twisting everything," he shouted. She's always thought she was better than this family because she played with numbers. That Marina was supposed to be mine. The old man never appreciated what I gave up. I fixed what should have been mine in the first place. The judge warned him to sit down. He didn't. I only took what was owed to me, he continued, voice rising. That will was never supposed to exist. I made sure it didn't. The words hung in the air like smoke. His own attorney closed his eyes in defeat. In one furious outburst, my father had just admitted on the record to destroying the original will and committing self-dealing. Rebecca didn't even need to say another word. I remained completely still, hands folded on the ledger. The same quiet I had been shamed for my entire life was now the loudest thing in that courtroom. If you've ever watched someone who tried to erase you finally expose themselves in front of everyone who mattered, there's a strange kind of peace that washes over you. Not joy, not revenge, just the deep satisfaction of watching the truth finally balance the books. Judge Ramirez called a short recess. When she returned, her ruling was swift and clear. She admitted Grandpa Hank's will to probate. She removed my father as administrator immediately. She ordered a full surcharge for the self-dealing and improper transfers, meaning he would have to repay every dollar taken from the estate, and she referred the forgery and concealment to the prosecutor for review. The gavel came down. My father sat motionless, staring at the table as the reality crashed over him. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. The courtroom emptied slowly after the ruling. My father left without looking at anyone, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen. Ryan waited for me in the hallway. For a long moment we just stood there, the weight of everything that had happened settling between us. Then he stepped forward and pulled me into a hug, the first real one in years. Imsuri, al, ewisparat. I should have seen it sooner. You see it now, I said quietly. That's what matters. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. The will was fully probated exactly as Grandpa Hank had written it. Ryan and I became joint owners of the marina and the prime waterfront property. My father received the cash portion Grandpa had set aside for him, nothing more. The forged parcels were returned to the estate, and he was ordered to repay every improper dollar. The prosecutor's office is still reviewing the case, but the damage to his reputation in our small town was already done. Ryan and I sat down together one cold December morning in the marina office. The navy blue ledger lay open between us on the old desk. I want to run the yard and the boats, he said. But I need you to keep the books. The real ones. I smiled for the first time in months. The books stay honest, I told him firmly. Or I walk. No exceptions. He nodded without hesitation. We shook on it like Grandpa Hank would have wanted, not with grand promises but with clear boundaries. We reopened Whitaker's Marina on the first Saturday in January. I oiled the brass bell myself, the same one I used to ring as a little girl. When the first customers arrived, that familiar clear ring echoed across the docks. It sounded like coming home. Ryan has stepped up in ways I never imagined. The new fatherhood and the crisis seem to have grounded him. He's on the docks at dawn now, learning the rhythms Grandpa Hank taught me. We're not the same family we once were. We're smaller, more careful, and far more honest. The doors between us are open, but they lock from the inside now, and we both know where the keys are. If you've ever been the quiet one who carried the weight while others took the credit, I want you to hear this: your silence was never weakness. It was preparation. The moment you decide to read the books out loud, with patience, evidence, and calm strength, everything changes. Grandpa Hank was right all along. The numbers don't lie, and neither should the people who keep them. I still wear the silver key around my neck. I still open the navy blue ledger every morning, but now I do it knowing I'm not just useful. I am wanted, I am seen, and I am finally home. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. If it reminded you to check the papers, protect your peace, or finally speak your truth, drop a book emoji in the comments and share it with someone who needs to hear it. The quiet ones have always kept the real books. It's time we read them out loud.